Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Stoa. Today, we are in for a treat because we are going to talk about something called emotional effector patterns. If you've heard of this before, I'm curious if you can just put in the chats like, yes, you heard it. If you haven't heard it, just you don't have to put anything, just to get a feel of who's aware of this. And if you're not aware of this, like I said, this is you're in for quite a treat because we have Laura Bond here today, and she's the founder of The Emotional Body and I'm reading her bio on the website, she has been described as a world-class somatic practitioner and scholar dedicating her career to providing safe and reliable techniques for physical emotional regulation and the development of emotional expression and fluency. And I've had some experience kind of doing self-practice with this technique, and I found it very, very powerful. And it's used in the acting scene as a way to kind of engender emotions in a kind of a reliable and safe way. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to take in Laura in a minute. She's going to present what emotional effective patterns are and how they're used. And we're going to do a collective exercise together. Then we're going to pivot to the Q&A at the end. Same standard. If you have any questions anytime throughout the session, put it in the chat. I'll call on you, unmute yourself, ask your question to Laura. If you don't want to be on YouTube, because this will be on YouTube, indicate that in the chats. So that being said, I will allow everyone to unmute themselves. And Laura, welcome to the Stoa.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's so great to be here. And hello, everyone who is here. I'm so glad to have you here and have joined us for this conversation about emotion, which is one of my favorite topics. So I thought I might just tell you a little bit about myself and how I first learned about the emotional effector patterns, and then perhaps share some information about what the emotional effector patterns are. How does that sound, Peter? All right. So I started off learning about the emotional effector patterns when I was a young professor teaching acting. And I started off at the university level, and I was using a number of methods that I had been trained in when I was in graduate school and undergraduate school. And I was thinking about how I might be teaching young people about how to take on emotional life. I was an acting teacher and teaching directing and teaching voice to young people. And a lot of the methods that I had learned when I was in graduate school and undergraduate school did not feel particularly safe for young people to take on emotion for characters, for performing and so forth. And I was looking for safer methods and methods that would help young people and actors not only be able to take on the characters and take them on in a way that they could understand emotion and understand their characters better and more fully and with a full embodiment too, but also to release them and to release those emotions in a safe way and restore back to their personal lives, which is a real big issue for performers, is having that ability to come back to themselves and to balance out, to find a sense of neutrality, to restore back to their lives and leave the character on the stage and in the theater or in the film studio and not take it home with them. There are a lot of studies these days about actors and performers and how stressful their lives really are because they are taking on these characters and the stressful lives of these characters and hadn't had enough lessons about how to let go of those characters. And so those characters and their emotional lives and their problems and their psyche are coming in and infiltrating their way into their own lives. And so that is where I first went looking for other methods that felt healthier And I was on my way to a conference, the Association for Theater and Higher Education conference, and opened up a program and saw this description of emotional effector patterns and based in science and evidence-based research. And I thought, oh, that's fantastic. And Dr. Susanna Block, she was coming to present at a conference with a number of her colleagues and to talk about how this research-based method for taking on and letting go of emotion was now being used for actors. And so I just flocked to it and took it on immediately. And that was my first exposure to that in, about the mid to late 90s, 1990s. And ever since then, learning about that first, being introduced to that at first, I was in hot pursuit to learn more, to train more, and at first for my profession as a teacher, but I quickly learned the more I trained in it, that it was benefiting me a lot as an individual, that I was learning so much more about myself and my relationship with emotion and how I could sense and feel emotion if I really practiced it and practiced these emotional effector patterns. I could sense them in the most subtle ways, but before they would emerge in me and perhaps take over a situation that I did not want those emotions to take over in a way that felt out of control, that I felt that I had greater control or greater sense of agency with myself and my relationship with emotion. So it was at that time that I realized the great potential for these emotional effector patterns and going well beyond its use for acting and right into the potential for all human beings to benefit by learning the emotional effector patterns for their personal lives and for their professional lives. So I would love to tell you more about them. Perhaps maybe I could share a little slideshow and maybe give a little history. Would that be all right, Peter? All right, I got the thumbs up. All right, so I'm going to try a little share screen and show you a little slideshow that I hope will help demonstrate just a little bit more about. Here we go. So I'll eventually get to the emotional body and explain the method itself, but the origins, to go back of how this all started, it was first, the emotional effector patterns were first discovered by two scientists. We had Susanna Block, professor of neurophysiology, and her colleague, Guy Santabanez. And they sought out, and this was happening in the late 1960s, early 1970s, when they first were doing this research. Now, this is a time, it's really important to realize this was early neuroscience and early neuroscience research. And this was a time now where a lot of us, we're so used to hearing about science and its relationship with emotion. But these two scientists were asking, they were early scientists that were saying, is there a way to measure emotion in the human body? And there were few scientists that were doing that at that time and asking those important research questions at that time. And what was amazing about what they did and discovered through their research was they discovered there was a common breath and muscle movement in patterns in our behavior that work together, very similar to a biological code that actually induces each of the basic emotions. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about the basic emotions because there are so many different theories on basic emotions. So I'll get to that. And then gradually after some of those discoveries that they made, they realized that they needed to do some testing to explore these patterns and to see how, if they were to teach these patterns to people, would it actually induce the emotion organically within them? They made the discovery and noticed these patterns within people. But then their second research question was, if we teach these patterns to people, will it organically bring up that emotion in them? So then they collaborated with Pedro Orthos. He was a professor of dramatic art and brought the pattern discoveries into a physical method for emotion regulation, which they called at the time the BOS method. And the BOS method just comes from using the letters of their last name and to create that acronym for the BOS method. So the early emotional effector patterns that they discovered then turned into a method for teaching them and sharing them, which they called the BOS method. Later on, Susanna Bloch developed her own method for teaching the emotional effector patterns, and she called that ALBA emoting. And then you might hear sometimes that this method could be called the ALBA method or ALBA technique. And that's all stemming from Susanna Bloch's methods and the people that she has worked with. And I have trained with Susanna Bloch and trained in the ALBA method and ALBA emoting as well. So I'll talk a little bit more about that too. So those are the origins. And then let's see where it goes and what that means. So let me see if I can go to the next slide. There we go. So emotion theory, there are many different theories about basic emotions, and it just depends on which branch of science that we're looking at, which scientists, how they have done their research. So let me just clarify something here, is that these emotional effector patterns are based in basic emotion theory, and they are going with that idea that the origins of the method, the BOS method, supports the emotion theory that all human beings start, so infants, babies, start expressing their needs with basic emotions. So that is what their research started with and is stemming from in their basic emotion theory. If it helps you, if you're not familiar with emotion theory, if you're familiar, and a lot of us are, if you're familiar with color mixing theory, basic emotion theory is kind of similar to color mixing theory. And Susanna Bloch used to like to talk about this as well, is our colors that we see in the world are mixed from 3 primary colors. And so if you think about the red, blue, and yellow as 3 primary colors, then all the other colors in the world that we're seeing are mixes of those. Well, basic emotion theory goes with that same idea that as babies, we are hardwired to express our needs through basic emotions. And because that's before we have words to express what we want. So we have those basic emotions available to us. And then as we mature, they start to mix. And those basic emotions are still there in us. But as we've matured as human beings, then we have developed very intricate and involved mixed emotional states. And so that's how that has developed over time, and how also it can be confusing for us to understand emotion, because the more we mature, more complicated our emotional lives are. If you're wondering what these little suns are in my presentation, my book, The Emotional Body, has all of this explained. So if anybody has had my book, and I'll explain that later on, these are just page references and chapter references. So here are babies expressing the 6 basic emotions. This is what the emotional effector patterns discovered. Now you'll notice that there are 7 pictures, because one of the basic emotions actually has sort of the 2 sides of the coin. There is an active and a receptive mode that they discovered. So the emotional effector patterns, they were so excited to have discovered these very distinctly within their breathing, facial expressions, and postural attitudes. And I'll explain what that is in a moment as far as the parts are to emotional effector patterns. But I use these pictures, and I use lots of pictures and videos of babies to help remind us all that these are the origins. This is what we recognize when we are thinking about emotional effector patterns, that it's the early developmental stages of us going back to the baby state. So when we're training in this, I'm reminding people who study with me all the times, we're going back, we're reminding ourselves of our baby state. And we look at these pictures and we look at those videos just to help us identify these patterns in behavior and in their looks. Now, as I said, as children mature, those basic emotions start to mix and they start to create very complicated expressive states in their feelings. So these pictures are actually demonstrating mixed states. So very young, and young children, even as young as 18 months old, will start to mix those basic emotions. And it just depends on their environment. It's learned behavior. It's really important for us all to remember that mixed emotional states, it's learned behavior, that basic emotions are hardwired, biological, they're available there for our survival to give us communication. But the mixed emotional states, that's learned behavior, it's enculturated behavior, and it's going to be different from one person to the next. It's very subjective. If it helps with that color mixing idea to help us understand why mixed emotional states are so highly subjective, that if I had all of you in a room and I gave each of you red paint and blue paint, if I handed you each a little bucket of red paint and blue paint, and I said, all right, each of you mix purple, and you would each come up with varying shades of what you believe purple is, because your perception of purple is different than the next person's perception of purple, just like these color samples are. And your ability to mix red and blue and the ratio of how much red and how much blue is going to vary. And because it's going to vary, you're going to come out with different results. And that's the same idea with how we mix basic emotions and why our mixed states and our expressions are so different, and why emotion can be so confusing for us as adults. So I promised to share with you just a little bit about the emotional body and how is the emotional body different from ALBA and ALBA method. The core of it is still absolutely the emotional effector patterns. And that's what all the teachers, what we all say, we are teaching the emotional effector patterns, but it is the way that we teach it that's different. It's a little bit different. And so that is the emotional body method, is how we teach it and what we start to incorporate. So I trained in ALBA moding from 2000 to 2005, including a month-long sabbatical with Susanna Block in Chile. And at that time, she encouraged me to find my own way of teaching the emotional effector patterns. And she knew that I was really interested in Feldenkrais awareness through movement, and interested in voice work, because I do a lot of voice training and teaching. And so I was quite interested to see the relationship of voice with emotion as well. And she always felt like there had not been enough exploration yet of voice in the emotional effector patterns either, and encouraged me to explore that as well, and encouraged me to go and work with Feldenkrais instructors. So I did. So I went off and I worked with all these fantastic Feldenkrais instructors over the years, Lavinia Plonka, Odette Goumand, and then Jessica Beck. And over those years working with them, I found that by learning more about the awareness through movement and somatic education, that I was able to refine my own way of teaching the emotional effector patterns and help make the way that I taught the emotional effector patterns more approachable, more to a vast audience, to people who were not necessarily actors, but I was learning ways to teach the emotional effector patterns in a way that felt gentle, that felt inviting, and that felt much more detailed because of the Feldenkrais method. And I'll never forget Odette Goumond coming up to me in one of the early trainings when I first met her and saying, could there be a Feldenkrais way of teaching these emotion patterns? And indeed, after 10 years of working with these instructors and learning so much about the Feldenkrais method, I believe that we have found that. And so I'm looking forward to sharing some of that with you all later. I'm going to share some exercises with you and see what you think. So that became my research question as I explored for years. And then just a little bit, if you're not familiar with Moshe Feldenkrais, the core of the work is somatic education, soma meaning the entire body of an organism. And somatic sensing, when we are teaching the emotional effector patterns, we're encouraging the ability to fine tune your somatic sensing. It's experiencing the entire body from within. And it's very subtle work that you're taking your time so that you can notice really subtle movements in tiny little muscles and in your breath, and not pushing for a result, but more so making personal discoveries. And he believes that performing an action again and again, the body will place it into the subconscious. And so what was once voluntary now becomes involuntary in our habits. So exploring what our habits are and looking at our habits and then asking ourselves, do we want to reinvestigate new habits? So he would say, only when you know what you are doing can you do what you want. And I've always loved that quote, that by learning things like this, like the origins of our emotions, that we have a greater sense of what's actually happening in our bodies when we are experiencing emotion. When emotion is coming at us from somebody else, we can read it so much better. And when we're expressing things emotionally, perhaps we have a greater sense of what we're expressing. And so therefore, maybe have greater agency in doing what we want. A few basic learning strategies that the Feldenkrais method uses that have strongly influenced the way that I teach and the way that our emotional body teachers use is that we have a process of learning and doing that is rather than working towards a goal. So you're not going to hear me say, oh, now we're going to go for this emotion, or we're going to push towards this emotion, to the point where I had even developed a labeling system that doesn't even list the emotion words. It takes the semantics out of it so that we don't get result oriented and instead discovery oriented. It helps us go inside into that somatic sensing and turn on that inner camera inside our bodies and make those discoveries. Also is the work is very slow and gentle. Gentle movements. I don't go for big, strong, bold actions to keep it not only in a safe learning environment, an inviting learning environment, but by doing gentle, slow movements, we actually can learn more about the fine movements that are happening in our bodies, the subtle things that are happening in our bodies. We're also sensing differences and perceiving the whole interconnectedness of the patterns in movement and seeing how does this help us if we notice one little thing that's happening perhaps in the face or the hands or the breath, and then realizing that when we change one little thing in our soma, how it affects the entire being. And then always allowing the student to find their own way with the lesson is asking questions rather than leading or pushing, is letting you be in the driver's seat as you're learning, and move within the limits of safety, avoiding pain and strain. If you are feeling any pain or strain, then we're always saying less is more, do less, do less. so that it becomes a luxurious, actually, exploration, believe it or not, because sometimes people see the word emotion and it scares them. And we don't want them to be afraid of exploring their emotions. We want them to feel enticed by this idea. These are the emotional effector patterns. This is how I labeled them. They are, I learned this in about mid 2000, right around 2005, 2006. I was teaching a workshop, and I was talking with a professor who said, wow, it would be so great to take the emotion words completely out of this, because not only do I teach internationally, so I teach with a lot of people with varying languages. So I found that emotion words and semantics got in the way anyway. But also it took that goal-oriented aspect out of it. So I thought, well, numbers and letters, that's going to take emotion and semantics out of it. I also realized that the patterns had three cognate pairs, three specific cognate pairs. There are two nose breathing patterns. There are two mouth breathing patterns, and there are two nose-mouth combination patterns. And so that's how they were labeled, was by using those cognate pairs. And interestingly enough, out of those cognate pairs, there are opposites within, as you're going to polar opposite emotional states. As you breathe through the nose and you change subtle movements with your muscles and the breathing pattern, you can move from what some might call a positive emotional state to a negative emotional state, although we try not to use those terms. So I have A and B, because we try, because the belief and the treatment of emotions in our work is that we need all of these. So we don't even want to label them as positive or negative. So I just gave a letter, A and B. And the same with the two patterns, as you breathe in and out through the mouth and change subtle things with your muscles and the breathing pattern, that you can move from one polarity to the other. And this is yet another term, actually, believe it or not, that is used a great deal in somatic education in the Feldenkrais method, which is reversibility. And so this patterning, actually, of the labeling is reinforcing this concept of reversibility. As we learn how to shift from one to the other, and I'm going to show you how to do that in a little while and let you explore that, that we can reverse from one emotional state to another by using this ability to stop an action or a process, restart it, reverse it, or drop it. And that is a beautiful thing about this method, is that we can develop that ability as we start to fine tune our ability to use these patterns. The zero breath pattern is what was a pattern that was actually not necessarily discovered in research, but actually developed by the original scientists, the BOS team, because they knew that they needed to establish a rebalancing pattern, a neutralizing pattern to use within the method, so that people would have the opportunity to clear back to a rebalancing. And so this was based in a number of different methods used universally and throughout the world, whether in meditation, yoga, and in various different kinds of research that they had done. And they combined them into what they called their neutral breath pattern. And then they took it further into also another practice called step out. So finally, this is just a reminder of what these are called effector patterns. So this labeling that and these patterns that we're going to be exploring, and I'll be talking about more as we get into the Q&A, that effector patterns are an agent causing an effect. So therefore, it is like a nerve ending activating, or a muscle or a molecule affecting an enzyme or activity. And it applies a series of effector patterns that applying these, you can achieve a holistic physiological effect throughout the whole body. So these start a chain reaction, and then your body just starts to fill in. It's like an invitation Sometimes I describe it as it's like a key that's unlocking a door and opening up the door to an emotion. And then your body kind of goes, oh, I know what this is. I recognize what this is. And then you just answer that question. Do you want to go there or not go there? And your body may accept that and then go into it. Your body may go, no, not going to go there. I'm going to go here instead. So as we train in this method, we are teaching people how to do these patterns and unlock that door to that emotion and see how, and then help them invite it in if that's what they want to do. We always start in 0, so that is the rebalancer, that we get good at this rebalancing, so that we feel once again that we have a sense of control, we have a sense of coming home again, and that we know that we can go from 0 then into 1A, back to 0, to 1B, back to 0. So that also teaches us how to have a sense of physical, emotion, regulation, and control. All purely physical. No imaginative stimuli used, no memory stimuli used. So there's no cognitive interaction trying to get you to remember episodes or times in your life in order to connect with emotion. That is also one of the great gifts of this work. Purely physical, by breath, muscle, movements, causing these shifts. And this is the parts. So the core of it is the breath. We start with the breath, and then gradually we add on these other elements of a postural attitude, a facial expression. And we call them expressions. Sometimes we look at these things like a postural attitude, a facial expression. Sometimes people will go, oh, is that going into that fake it till you make it kind of thing? Well, no, it's just a way of describing what's actually happening when we move muscles either in small groups or large groups. So a facial expression is moving certain muscles that are in a small area that are connecting with very active nerve endings. In the if you've studied polyvagal and the polyvagal theory, the vagus nerve, sometimes that is connecting with vagus nerve and so forth. Those tiny little muscles are activating different nerve endings too. And so a facial expression is oftentimes doing that, even though we're not even aware of it. Postural attitudes are more large muscle groups, bigger muscle groups, and how that aligns our body and moves our body forward, backward, and upward or downward. When we are first learning or practicing these patterns, there are 3 stages of learning them. At first, people feel very mechanical because they're putting a lot of their concentration on how to do these. So as you try these things in an interactive environment, don't be surprised if you just feel, oh, I just feel very mechanical right now. I feel like I'm just trying to keep track of what my breath is doing and what my face is doing. And if you don't feel anything different, don't worry. That just means you're staying in that level of learning at that time. But the next level is an induction level. And that means if you actually feel something emotionally that you identify because you're doing the pattern, you go, oh, I feel something. Wait a minute. I felt a shift emotionally, even if it's subtle. That means that you have actually successfully unlocked that emotion door and something's opening up for you. And just notice that oh, something's working in there. And that's the induction phase. And it'll come and go like a little flash in the pan at first as you're first exploring these patterns. And then the third stage of learning is called integration, where you have trained in it and you have practiced it so much that you can even sometimes just think the pattern and think about these patterns, and you start to feel the emotion. It takes a long time to get there, though. And so I think that I just jumped here. This is just a little bit from the book. When we're studying the patterns, we do look at all 3 parts and we explore them in great detail. We won't necessarily do that today, but we actually have graphs that draw out what the breathing pattern looks like so that people can understand that. We study the actual muscles in the face and explore how to move certain muscles in the face. And we're going to do a little bit of that very soon. And then we even look at the postural attitudes and not only how it affects how we stand, how we sit, but also how we move. How we move as we approach people or we withdraw from people or things, and also the muscle tone or tension, whether it is high or low. So that is my presentation on the background, the information of the emotional body. If you want to learn more, you can go to my website and also learn more about my book as well there. But I'm going to stop the share for right now. And then, Peter, do you think this is a good time to just do some exercises? What do you think?
Yeah, that feels about right.
Okay, I'm gonna get a little drink, and then I would say wherever you are, listeners, if you want to just get in a comfortable position where you feel like you can breathe and you don't have to stand up, you can sit, you can even lie down if you want. You just have to hear my voice. So wherever you are, I invite you to just take a moment, and you can, if you like, close your eyes just for this part. And just take a moment and imagine that you have a camera, that's this magical camera that can just go deep down inside you, and just let that camera go deep inside and just get a sense of how you're feeling right now, which is a wonderful place to start. Let that camera go wherever it wants to go, wherever it's invited to go. Where is it drawn to? What's calling it? As you answer those questions, just notice, is it something in your breathing? Is it something in your muscles, in either an answer to comfort or discomfort? Is it something in your mind, something you're thinking? Or is it something you're feeling emotionally? We are at all times thinking, feeling, sensing, and doing. At all times. Even when we feel like we're doing nothing, we are at all times thinking, feeling emotions, sensing, and doing, because breath is doing. Just notice what's happening in your soma, in your body. And this is your first step in somatic sensing. And just ask yourself, how are you? How am I? As a starting point. And then I invite you to just notice your breathing. When we're noticing our breathing, we want to notice different aspects of how we breathe. first consider, what is the pathway? Is the air coming into your body through the nose or through the mouth? And you don't have to change anything, just notice. It's just where you went. And as it travels into your body, how much of your body is expanding? And where is it expanding? Are you expanding in a low place, around the abdominal area, around the mid region, the thoracic region? Are you expanding in the chest as you breathe? Just notice. And then as you exhale out, how do you exhale out? Does it come out the nose or the mouth? And finally, notice the rate. How long is your inhale and how long is your exhale? Are they equal to each other? Are they different? Just notice if one is longer than the other and how it feels to breathe in this way. And while you breathe in this way, I'm going to invite you, if you want to try it, to breathe in possibly a different way, depending on where you are right now. Consider the idea of breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth, with the mouth just being very relaxed, the jaw being relaxed, and the mouth just softly, gently parting in order to let the air out. The nasal passage being relaxed and letting the air flow in easily. And imagine the air coming in through the nose in that relaxed passage and going down deep into the lowest part of yourself and expanding the lowest part of yourself. Down, expanding the abdominal region, the thoracic region, if you will, but allowing the upper chest to be as relaxed as possible, relatively still, and the shoulders to be relaxed. Allowing the deepest part of yourself to expand as you inhale. And then gently, softly let the air out through your mouth with a relaxed jaw. And if you can, try to make the inhale and the exhale of equal length. Equal inhale to equal exhale length. And in your mind, just count to try to make them equal to each other. If you feel extra effort to do this, then simply reduce the length just a tiny bit so it feels easy yet slow. And allow a gentle turnaround between the inhale and the exhale and the exhale and the inhale. And while you do this, the last thing I invite you to do is simply, softly open your eyes and look at a focal point somewhere directly across from you. It might be on a ceiling if you're lying down. It might be across on a wall. Just something to rest your eyes on softly and look at that place and imagine that you are taking air from that place and sending air to that place. And while you continue to breathe in this way, in through the nose and out through the mouth, imagine your face relaxed and your body relaxed and all your muscles relaxed. And ask yourself now, with that inner camera, eyes open on your focal point, how do you feel? Is there a word to describe how you feel in this pattern? And we're going to call this pattern 0. How does this pattern feel compared to the way that you were before when we did our check-in in our first step of somatic sensing? See if you can remember this pattern of 0 to come back to as I invite you to try something else. I now invite you to gently, softly, just simply close your mouth and continue with this breathing pattern just the way it is, but in and out through the nose. Everything's the same, except now it's in and out through the nose. You're still breathing with the deepest, lowest part of yourself. It's an equal length of inhale to an equal length of exhale. Your eyes are open and looking at a focal point. The passageway is relaxed if you can make it and continue to make it relaxed. And just notice, does it feel different to breathe this way in and out through the nose? It's subtle, a tiny subtle change. And then gradually we're going to add some muscle movement for right now, just to the face, and see what happens. Imagine, just imagine that your nasal passage is getting more narrow. It's tightening, and it's making it more difficult to bring the air in and the air out. You actually have some muscles that align the sides of the nose that can make this happen. But if you just imagine, it's tightening and it's getting harder to bring the air in and the air out, pulling the air in and pushing the air out. Just by tightening that nasal passage, see what other muscles in the face want to follow. So once again, you're breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. You are engaging deep breathing, expanding from a low place. In through the nose and out through the nose. But now the nasal passage is getting tight. And I also invite you to imagine muscles that are underneath your eyes and on the outsides of your eyes, pressing inward towards your nasal ridge, towards your nose, helping to constrict that nasal passage, making it tighter. And you might even feel your nasal passage get even tighter as you do it. You might even feel your eyes narrowing as you do it. And last, I invite you, if you want to try it, allowing the lower jaw, the lower teeth to press forward ever so slightly, as if your lower teeth were lining up with your upper teeth. And you'll feel some tension coming into your jaw and tension in your cheeks, as everything in your face is now going inward towards the nose, the jaw, the upper cheeks, and narrowing that passage. Remaining in that deep breathing, looking at your focal point, eyes open, eyes open. And then ask yourself, how does this feel? Is there a word to describe how you feel? Is there any emotion coming up as you narrow and tense the face inward towards the nose and push the jaw forward slightly? And lastly, I invite you to send all those muscles in your face that are pressing towards the nose, send them back towards the ears. Imagine them going back, back, back towards the ears, softly, gently, easily. And if it helps, gently, softly, easily, just take fingertips and coax your muscles back towards the ears. Coax the muscles around your nose back towards the ears. Coax the muscles in your cheeks back towards your ears. And allow a gentle smile to form in your lips, in your cheeks, and in your eyes. Can you imagine your eyes smiling? Can you imagine your nose smiling? All the muscles in your face are now going in the opposite direction. It's reversibility in action now. Those muscles are going out, out, out instead of in, away from the midline of your face. Engaging your face in a full facial smile, gently, softly, and now opening up your nasal passage and breathe in through the nose and out through the nose. A gentle turnaround between the inhale and the exhale and the exhale and the inhale. And maybe just make the exhale through the nose a little bit longer, just a tiny bit longer. Let it hang out there on the end for just a moment as you exhale through the nose and enjoy that smile on your face. Keep it there. Smiling eyes, smiling cheeks, and see how it feels as you breathe in and out through the nose. And finally, ask yourself, how does that feel? And we're going to call this pattern 1A, with the muscles going out towards the ears, breathing in and out through the nose. And it's just part of the pattern. It's not the whole one. It's just a taste, just a little taste. What does 1A feel like as opposed to 1B, which was inward towards the midline of the face and the constriction in the nose? And if you want to, for one last moment, go back and forth, do some reversibility. Go out, go in, explore if you want. Out and in, and you're still breathing deeply. You're still breathing in and out through the nose. And the biggest difference is the engagement of those muscles in your face and how they're affecting your breathing pattern. There's a subtle difference in the breathing pattern in 1A, which we would develop more as we had more time. But for now, just see what it's doing to your breathing as you move these muscles in your face and how you feel. And then I finally invite you to go to 0. Let go of this. Breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. And if it helps, softly, gently, just wipe your face. Gently remind yourself to let go of that muscle engagement. Gently wipe eyes towards ears and mouth towards ears, and the neck towards the ears. And if it helps, do a little shake and breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth, coming back to 0. And just notice the difference, if you feel a difference. And don't worry too much if you don't feel a big difference. Remember, it might just feel mechanical. What if you did feel something? Just notice what it was and give it a name for yourself. and then just relax. Take a moment, stretch, shake, release, restore, shake, rattle, and roll, whatever helps bring you back. And that ends my interactive for right now, in case people want to try more later. But I think it's time for me to stop doing all the talking and let some people ask some questions. What do you think, Peter?
Yeah, it sounds great. So if you have any questions, start throwing them in the chats right now, and I'll call on you and you just unmute yourself. And I'll warm up Laura with some questions. Yeah, it was very interesting doing that. And I'm curious, like the attractor of what you use these for, like whether it's for acting or for maybe some therapy or personal development. Is there a way that they're arranged and practiced differently for each one of those purposes?
Yeah, wonderful question. Thank you. There are some practitioners, some teachers that specialize in how to apply them to different fields. Some are, really specific about how to apply it in acting and therapy and coaching and so forth, or somatic practices. And some are generalists. And the way that I teach it, I get a lot of people who come to my courses that are from all different backgrounds. So the ones that are from a therapy background or a coaching background, they are using it mainly as their own informed practice to help them recognize the emotion patterns in their clients. And they might use a small amount of it as a minor coaching, but it's more for sort of observation and to recognize what's happening if there is some dysregulation within their expression. Whereas in a lot of our performance teachers, they are using it as a training method to help our performers learn how to understand emotion, take on the emotion, and then use that for character study and embodiment, and then learn how to mix those basic emotional states into more mature emotional expressions, because we rarely are going to be expressing in pure states, although occasionally we would. But as we train actors, it's a much more lengthy training process so that they fully understand how to use it and apply it to monologues, scenes, singing, dancing, and so forth. So those are just two profession examples, but I've taught scuba divers how to use these emotional effector patterns, and I've taught the patterns to cancer survivors as ways of just helping them access some of those A patterns that they haven't had felt accessible for such a long time. And it was a very rewarding and empowering workshop whenever I've done those.
And there's a few people in Toronto who, in York University, who are doing research on the emotional effector patterns when it comes to acting. And when I was inquiring into that, they're saying that it gives them, the actors, just greater agency. It's like a martial artist with emotion on all kind of aspects in your life. And if you're trained a martial artist, you're using it wisely. You're not just kind of like picking fights in bars and stuff like that. And something that was said that was quite interesting was like during the fear pattern, like a sense of primordial fear emerged, which sounded kind of dark and scary. So I imagine there's like has to be a really safe container in order for these two certain states to be engendered.
Yes, our instructors train for a long time to become certified and capable of teaching people how to use these patterns. And so we don't recommend that people read about them or try them and then go, oh, I'm going to go teach people how to do this. It's really not wise to do it at all, because you do need to have a really safe way of teaching it and to know what you're doing before you go into sharing this with other people. So yes, it can pull people. It can be misused just like anything, right? Just like fire and knives, they can be used really well for us, but they can be misused, right? So we want to always let people know that it's important to be responsible.
Right. Let's pivot to the Q&A. Evan, you had a question.
Yeah, so I wanted to get some feedback about the sort of felt experience of the set of transitions that we just went through and the connection between some of these somatic attractors or emotional effector patterns and the concept of limbic hijacking in everyday life. And so I just want to share a little bit about what that felt like for me and get your feedback on that. So, to preface this, I have some experience with similar things through a decade and change of practice in a tantrically influenced martial art. And so one thing I noticed is that that first pattern we went into with the equal breathing in and out actually ended up significantly elevating my level of physiological and mental arousal because from this martial arts training, I keep a balance toward, or it's not balanced, I keep a bias towards longer exhales, significantly longer. And this has been a very useful patterning for me to avoid getting triggered in daily life by emotional reactive patterns. And so I just was curious, is that like, say, moving from, exhales twice as long as your inhales into the first pattern you took us into, is that like the expected response that it would then lead to a higher baseline of, physiological somatic arousal compared to what I normally do?
Thank you. Wonderful question. Thank you very much. This is also why I much prefer things like 0 and 1A, 1B as labels rather than even neutral. I've never even liked using that word because not everybody has a neutral reaction to it, right? So the 0 pattern can oftentimes be described as active rest, an active rest mode. And Susanna Block would use that description a great deal. The patterns, the eyes are open, and there is a certain level of activity and an elevated, slightly elevated pulse, depending on the way that you are practicing it and how deep your breathing is. And you might find, and this is what I love about us all wearing Fitbits and things like that these days, that I get people in my workshops all the time, just sort of checking on how is their pulse and how does that compare from one pattern to the next, so that they can learn a lot about themselves. So that's great feedback on 0 for you and what 0 does for you, as opposed to the long exhale. A long exhale actually can calm us down and will bring us down to a relaxed state and calm our brain down a great deal. And believe it or not, the 1A pattern, the early research showed that 1A, which has a longer exhale, can bring us down below the 0 state. So the 0 is not necessarily going to be the calmest, easiest pattern to do, depending on how it's being done. And so I would never want anybody to feel like that is the calmest, most neutral state to be in, because it's not going to be. A lot of my uh, students, they have a preference for something like 1A because of the slightly longer exhale, and because the preference of nose breathing as opposed to the exhale out the mouth.
I also had a quick follow-up, if that's okay. I just with the when you brought in the facial muscles, and so the first set, the motion towards the center of the face, towards the nose. I don't. Again, I'm just looking for some feedback here because I don't know if this is typical or if I was doing it right. But that felt very sort of like pinched, like the sensation of maybe biting into a lemon, or reminded me of like stereotypical cartoon old man, like. And then the second one, where the facial muscles were more expansive into the towards the ears, felt like biting into a lovely chocolate cake, or like again, to use the older person analogy, seeing like a reaction to like a baby speaking its first words in the face. And so, is that sort of the intended effect of those?
Yes, great descriptions. Thank you. There are oftentimes the reactions when people are having responses or an induction with a pattern. There is the feeling like I feel almost a cartoon image. I feel like a character. It doesn't necessarily feel like the way I might express this emotion, but I'm feeling a relationship with something else or someone else, and imagery comes in at times. And Susanna Block would say that a lot of times too, that is completing the equation of what emotion is and feeling, is that you are not just having the physiology, the physiological response, but you are having a subjective identification of what is happening, because the brain is looking for meaning. You're doing this pattern that is inducing feelings in you. So it means that you had some kind of induction, but then your brain is looking for meaning. And so it's saying, okay, I need to have an image here. And so that's what I'm looking for. And yes, it's probably going to feel, it was interesting that you had an image of a baby in one of them with the 1A, like a baby image, and a cartoon image, because cartoons are oftentimes using basic or primary emotions for expression, because they're trying to relate to young audiences, that so they want those emotions to be identifiable. Makes complete sense. Excellent, bravo.
All right. We have scheduled 75 minutes in total, but we have a lot of delicious questions in the chat. Are you okay to stay a little bit over, maybe 5 minutes over, or you have to hard stop?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Good.
Peter, you had a question.
Yeah, thanks. That was a wonderful thing to do, and I felt so relaxed at the end. It was a really, the whole experience was really sort of gorgeous. But my question is partly answered by what you just said about the imagery. But there's maybe another dimension to that. So I was when I was in those two 1A, 1B state positions, as it were, I was having different associations, different words. I was having a sense of seeing myself from the outside, and that seemed to go with a sense I had that I was sort of going into a mask. I was becoming a mask. And I'm curious if that might relate. I can think of a number of things that could relate to, including possibly too much muscular effort, or too much trying to hold a position. But I'm wondering if that also relates to the idea of basic emotion in some way. Thank you.
Yes, yes, I can say that. First of all, the mask, I do want to clarify, we had not completed the entire pattern because we have 3 parts. We hadn't even included the postural attitude. And so a lot of the attention was on the face and effort was on the face. So it might also explain why there was that feeling of, wow, I have this intense feeling of wearing this mask. Because so much of the energy and effort was placed here. If we had done the breath and then didn't even pay attention to the face, but were instead working on the postural attitude for a while, then you might have had a different experience. The other thing is because of working those muscles that we're oftentimes not used to consciously moving, they are moving as a reaction to what we're thinking, feeling, sensing, reacting to out of life, right? And so it is a response mode that we're in, but instead we're initiating that and we're moving these muscles. And so because of that efforting, we might over effort. And so that was excellent observation that perhaps it might have been that you were, because of over efforting, it felt, very strong masking going on with that as well.
Just a tiny follow-up. Can we actually consciously move exactly the same muscles in exactly the same way as would consciously move in a reaction? I mean, is that something we know if it matches exactly, or is it difficult to make the two coincide? Thank you.
That's a great question, because first of all, our facial muscles vary in the number of facial muscles that we have from the person next to us. We don't all have the same exact facial muscles. And so because of that, we have a sense of inconsistency. Although these muscles that we're working on with the basic emotions, we're using the common ones that most people would have, unless there is an exception. Perhaps there might be a birth defect or something like that, or neurological disorder or anything like that, that might make it inaccessible. So I do always have to add that caveat. So that is one thing that it might vary depending on what we're reacting to, because we also have the mirror neurons. If we're reacting to something across from us, like someone, and we are mirroring them or mirroring behaviors or things like that, it might be quite different. And so to reproduce something, if we're trying to reproduce something that perhaps was a reaction, depending on what the stimulus was the stimulus somebody across from us that we were reacting to? And our perception of how we reacted may not be as accurate with our reproduction of that action. Does that make sense? That our perceptions are not always so clear, unless we had video, perhaps. So if there was video to capture it, our micro expressions and slow it down, minute micro expressions that we express, that it's incredible to see it when we slow down video footage, to see how many little tiny twitches all over the place of even just our face, let alone the rest of our entire soma is reacting to what's happening around us. That's why we do our work so slowly and gently, so that we can learn more and more and more. It's an excellent question, because it is, it's so complicated.
All right. We'll sneak in two more. Fiona, you had a question.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So first of all, thank you so much. That was genuinely mind-blowing for me, like how much I actually felt the things that we were sort of inducing. This is a little bit of a piggyback off of Peter's question, because the phrasing of the mask feeling reminded me so much of something that I read by a diagnosed sociopath. And it makes me wonder, like, because when we were doing those exercises, I was thinking this could probably be so effective for things like depression, maybe eating disorders. But then that comment about the mask made me wonder, could it be dangerous for other psychological disordered thinking, like maybe sociopathy, sort of making functionality more effective in ways that are potentially dangerous? So do you know if this has been used for psychological disorders? And if so, was it effective, and was that across the board?
Great questions because when I went to Chile to work with Susanna Block, I really wanted to learn more about who was using this in different fields, because up until that point, when I went there in 2006, I had only been exposed to theater practitioners in the United States using this method. But in Chile, a lot, because it had come out of the psychology department and in the studies of psychology, and then they partnered with theater, that they're already and have been consistently using this within a lot of their studies and in their work in psychology. And then I watched and observed one of their practitioners down there who had a whole center that was using it within therapy and coaching and psychology. And so I can't cite specifically too many studies right now that have been published about it to help you that much, Fiona, as far as a specific one. But if you look at sources or do some a little investigating, as far as especially ones coming out of Chile, that's where most of it is being done.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. I will.
And hopefully more will be done in the future. I'm really hoping this takes off even more.
Agree. I think it has huge potential.
Absolutely.
And double clicking on Fiona's question, I'm watching, when it comes to the sociopathic aspect of it, I'm watching the documentary The Vow right now with Nexium. And I don't know if you're familiar with it, but this guy ran this sort of like self-help improvement thing that turned into a cult. And he had a lot of advanced techniques in neurolinguistic programming, hypnosis. And some of the ones that they described really dealt with the emotion, like going to different emotional extremes, but to the point where it would serve like disassociative purposes for control. I wonder if you had any comments on that and how to sort of police that.
That one's a little more tricky for me to be able to address, as far as, because I don't have experience in that area. And so I don't want to speak in an area that I don't have experience in. I do know that there are people who are investigating and researching this method and to see how it could be used within these fields. But as far as how it might be used in order to, I couldn't speak personally on that.
And I think the last question for us here at the Stoa, we have I don't know if you checked out our website, we have a wisdom gym. We have like a mixture of cognitive, somatic, different types of practices. And people in the chats are like, I'm buying Laura's book. I want to take her facilitation. Like they're getting all excited. How could we learn more about practicing with you, or how can we practice with ourselves here at the Stoa with using these techniques?
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you for asking that. I have my website, theemotionalbody.co, not com, not com, but co. So just theemotionalbody.co. If you go to my website, you have all the information there of my books, and my books are available on Amazon. I have two. I have The Emotional Body, and I also have Team for Actors if you're interested in acting. So they're both listed on my website. And we have an upcoming course actually online we have a few spaces left in the introductory course in December. So that's all listed on my website as well. We have a part 1 in December online. So you don't even have to try and travel. We're doing this because of COVID times. And then we have a part 2 that goes in January. And then we have a special actor training one that's in January as well for people who've had some previous training. And then we try to offer some courses in the summer as well. And gradually, my hope is to offer some audio recordings and some things that people can use with my book to help take the book off the page and into a practice mode. And that is one of my goals for this upcoming year, because I know because of some of the limitations in the world right now, people can't even get a copy of the book. In certain countries, I've had people ask me and they can't even get mail right now. So I'm trying to make some of this work more accessible gradually through whether it is online courses or audio recordings or things like that. So come to our website and subscribe. It's a free subscription, and that way you'll get any announcements of anything coming up.
Beautiful. And I'll put all that in the description on the YouTube page, and I put the link emotionalbody.co on the chats. And I'm a big fan of this technique, and seeing from people in the chats discovering for the first time, I think they are too. Someone just purchased your book. So there you go. So Laura, thanks so much for coming to Stoa today. Love to have you back. If you ever want to test something out here with us, you're always welcome.
I would love to. I've really enjoyed my time here. Thank you so much, Peter, for inviting me.
Thank you. And especially for, this heady time we're in with the election, we need some emotional processing for sure. So just to close out, you can check out the website stoa.ca for upcoming events. We have a Patreon and Substack for daily updates. Our next event tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern Time is called the Narratives Project. And this is a project that studies the evolution and divergences of political narratives to help people better understand the stories emerging around them. So all that culture war, polarization stuff that we geek out here at the Stoa, we're gonna talk to someone who does a project on that. That being said, Laura, everyone, thanks for coming to the Stoa again.